Steve Poikonen, one of my favorite guests of all time. And that says a lot because number one, my favorite reason to have Steve on is that he could take over the show when my internet totally heads south. And this is definitely one where you're going to want to hear what he has to say because the Wall Street Journal is making the case that people like Steve and I are basically living in our mom's basement, bottom dwellers, in order to make this all happen outside of the corporate press. This is titled Social Media Influencers Aren't Getting Rich. They're barely getting by. And they tell the story of this guy who lives in his mom's basement in order to make about $53,000 a year talking about the news on TikTok. So I brought Steve on because I'm really interested in this topic because generally speaking, I think the case they're trying to make is, well, personally, Steve, I think they're trying to convince themselves that they don't have to worry about alt media. And this is more like written for themselves. These people, like, they can't afford healthcare. They're not going to be like us. So it's not really the threat that you think it is. Okay. So before Steve answers, what he thinks about that? Is it just the media trying to make themselves feel better? Don't forget, you're going to be sitting here thinking, wow, this will only make sense if I get really drunk. What are these people arguing? I don't know. But the great news is you don't have to get drunk to enjoy anything at AlisonWinePromo.com because the wine is just that good. One sip and you're like, this is it. And you will always have an amazing bottle of wine to bring with you to those awkward cocktail parties. And like I said, if you're reading the news, you're like, yeah, I need something to drink because this is so terrible or this doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing with wine. You know what? A lot of wine is terrible and you need tons of it in order to enjoy it, but not AlisonWinePromo.com. These are hand harvested grapes in a lot of cases, high altitude regions of the world, the extremist wine of the extremist wine, the foodie wine, the wines that come from vineyards that are over 200 years old and have amazing stories with them. So join the Alison Wine Club, do AlisonWinePromo.com. Okay, so Steve, going back over to the article, my first question, do you think that this is actually even an article for us on the outside, or do you think it's kind of like projection on their part, just trying to make themselves feel better?
There's an enormous amount of projection going on. And I mean, let's be honest, there's not a lot of people who realistically make a ton of money being a full-time, podcast. They say influencer, which is totally different from what Allison does or what I do. But using that as a model, they're also going to pretend like the two people who have bylines on this article weren't paid pennies, per word in order to crank out this you're not the real news or whatever it is they're trying to tell people with this thing. You're gonna be broke, you're gonna live in your mom's basement your whole life if you want to be a social media influencer or a TikTok star. A lot of this, Allison, I really do think has some roots in the with the Restrict Act and the ban TikTok legislation and stuff, like the attempted buyout of TikTok. I think that as the traditional model of media delivery goes by the wayside and everything moves full time into the digital space, they're going to try, they being the traditional media in this sense, you're going to try and take up as much of the landscape and the real estate as humanly possible. This is obviously a way to, try to weed out anyone or discourage people from walking outside their house with a camera and taking a look around and then talking about the things that they're seeing, because ultimately it is a lot of citizen journalism, a lot of like Telegram groups from all over the world that can have videos get uploaded to social media apps and have people talk about what they're seeing, that have destroyed a lot of the really damaging attempts at propaganda, especially where war is concerned, over the last few years.
I think that was really a good point about all the people that are trying to get into the mainstream news business, if they still are, that make, like in my case, when I started, I made $18,000 a year before taxes. And
Mhm.
basically, my parents had to pay my apartment bill because I couldn't afford to live and that salary in Macon, Georgia. And okay, granted, that was what, 2008, but still, I mean, it is true. Like most people don't make it in the corporate press, where like there's a lot of competition there, and you really don't make a whole lot of money unless you're a main anchor or something. And even like in Seattle, the I got in right before they started cutting the salaries quite a bit, but like the guys and gals that were hired after me, I think they were making 60,000 or 65,000 in Seattle, which is really not a lot of money for Seattle. So I do
Mm.
always think it's funny when they make these cases about other people when it's like, I mean, yeah, you and I could agree with them that it can be a hustle, but I mean, if you think about it, okay, they didn't say. I didn't see exactly what this guy's salary is. They just said he makes less than 58,000, but I don't know how many hours he works. And in my particular case, it gives me the opportunity to raise my kids, the amount of freedom I have both from a content curation perspective and hours that I can set for myself, and also the life I can have. I think I froze for a second, but the life I can have in addition to it, I mean, I don't know. I think actually my hourly rate probably is higher than it would be if I were working 13 hours a day for a corporate newsroom.
Yeah, yeah, and you're probably correct on that. Um, the way that we fund the show is a little bit different, and we do it purely on the value for value system, which is simply like if you see value in what we're doing, send it our way because we take zero outside dollars whatsoever. There's no sponsored content or paywalled anything or advertising or ad reads. Um, so it's a bit different. Sorry about that. Um, but even then, like kind of understanding that Adam Curry, who came up with him and John Dvorak, C. Dvorak from No Agenda, came up with the value for value model for this. They chuckle and say, the first thing you do is you take a vow of poverty, and then you tell people about the value for value system. But I live in California. It's one of the most expensive places on the planet. Um, Bills are paid. Occasionally we get to do stuff because we have a producer base that understands basic economics, sees value in what we're doing, and wants to see something like that proliferate to the point to where we're all getting together in person here in a couple of weeks in Colorado for 12 bands and a half a dozen speakers, couple of panels, all in one really cool spot.
Steve, let me take you over to locals. There's a question that came in for you. If you want to join my editorial board, AlisonMorrow.locals.com, you get to put in questions ahead of time for interviews. And DMC asks, do you think some people became content creators during the inflated scamdemic ad rates and are unable to adjust to what things are like now in times where ad income is more similar to pre-scamdemic? That's a hard word to say, scamdemic. Not to mention rates are dropping.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an observation that can be made pretty much across the board. You hear people that not just in the content creator space or whatever, a lot of shows that just aren't around anymore. And a lot of people who had to hang it up and go back to whatever they were doing beforehand. That's basically everything on the internet though. You hear about do you hear about the OnlyFans chicks that have the exact
No.
same problem where they were raking it in when everybody was getting the lockdown money and nobody had, it was like, okay, well, I got free government money and there's all this stuff on the internet. Sure, I'll throw $5 at this, $10 at that. Why not? Who's counting? And the end result of that is you had a lot of people walking around with a really false sense of security. And when it got back to the grind again, and we're living now 4 years into Joe Biden's economy, and it's not great, you really have to have something in order to survive doing this. Yeah, the whole influencer thing and TikTok dollars and Instagram dollars, I don't really understand all of that, but I do understand what it takes to produce a show, what it takes to reach and maintain an audience, and then how to try to get out of whatever algorithmic ghettos they've slammed you into. and have multiple different ways of trying to prevent you from getting out of.
They write here that something like, well, they're talking about how you can make some money. They say it can take months or years to earn money, and those who stick with it eventually see some returns. Survey show, though they never say what survey. But money doesn't mean big bucks. Last year, 48% of creator earners made $15,000 or less, according to NeoReach, an influencer marketing agency. Only 13% made more than $100,000. But what I think is interesting is a lot of they don't necessarily, I mean, they don't say here specifically that maybe these people who are making, 15,000, it may not be something they're doing full time anyway. It may just be like I'm popping on every once in a while. I have this other job and $15,000. I'm like, I'm happy with it. I mean, that's an extra 15 grand that I'm not making at my day job. And I don't know. Yeah, like it's a lot more work than people realize. Says analysts, creators who make a living doing it have been at it for many years. Most are not overnights. And I mean, I don't disagree with that. I do think that I've worked hard. It's true that things can change. But I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm biased against this agenda to just try to get everybody thinking that like this is just some world of people who or even intellectually, and we're just all kind of like pretending that we have it all together when really they figured it out and have it all together, and it's a big mess.
Yeah, there's the overall well, and I think this is why they're focused on influencers, right? Instead of I didn't see a single mention of anyone that like would stumble into the realm of media in this article. And I believe that's deliberate. I don't think that they want to open the can of worms on what is or isn't journalism in the digital age right now. I don't think they want to litigate who's got a popular news show, a bit, especially when the Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast on the planet, and there's people that are flocking to WeChat. I'm sorry, X, but also WeChat, um, to watch Tucker Carlson or Alex Jones or whomever. But the entire business model has changed. The market has changed, and this is another attempt, really, of the traditional media trying to grasp onto the last little bit of market share when they don't have any new ideas. They're only trying to repeat the same narrative over and over and over. They don't know how to communicate to a generation of internet consumers who have been largely cynical about all of the if you're like in part of the internet culture and it's not just something that you doom scroll for 10 seconds and think that you have a grasp on world affairs, but if you're deep into the internet culture, you haven't trusted any of these clowns anyway. So they don't know how to act here because first of all, they mocked it relentlessly. And then when they were forced to deal with it, they tried to treat it like it was cutesy and cartoonish. When they realized that the internet is where news was getting broken now, they tried to absorb it into their business model. Everybody still clowned them for it. And now we're at the point where you've got, CNN, yeah, disgraced CNN former superstar Chris Cuomo taking a deal with Patrick Bet David at Valuetainment because Chris Cuomo couldn't make it on his own, or with another, quasi establishment podcast network, because these guys can't do what we do. They're not authentic enough. They're not smart enough. They don't have enough life experience. They've only read off of scripts their entire existence, and they're not as good. And it's evident when they try to do what we do.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was an interesting point you made too about how you're right. In that article, they don't talk much about at all, really, about anything serious. It's mostly like a van life person or sock puppet guy. So yeah, they just don't even touch, especially like people like me. I mean, people like me are probably even more frightening because I'm one of them and I made the break and I'm doing okay. I mean, yeah, if I didn't have if my husband wasn't working, we would have a different life. I think we would, it would be different, but it wouldn't be impossible. I mean, I could, I could make it work if I had to. So I'm not just say that that doesn't help, but it's not impossible. I mean, actually, when I was getting into this business in 2020, when the whole COVID thing hit the fan, um, or was it 2021? No, it was 2020, right? It was 2020 when May 2020 around there or March around there.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
March
his business
15th
almost
was
sank.
yeah.
Yeah, so he got like all of his classes were canceled because he teaches. All of his classes were canceled. Nobody was meeting in person, and we survived on my income. Now, at the time, I was employed by the state, which then fired me over my podcast. But that said, like we were able to make it out. Yeah, just like everybody, you have budget issues and whatnot, but it's not. I don't know. I don't want to make it sound like everything is just golden roses or whatever, but I also think that it just seems like there has been, especially over the last few years, there's just been a real snobbery around it, and maybe that's because it's a reaction to people in alternative media going after them all the time. So it's a defensive posture on their part. Anyway, I have another question for you in a second. If you want to send me some actual real mail, you remember how to write. You have a pen and you have actual paper and an envelope and stamps. You can send me a letter to Cox 3355 Denellen, Florida 34432. I love getting cards. Here's a postcard of the Northern Lights. Somebody sent me from way, way, way up north. Really love getting the notes of encouragement. You can send me your loose pocket change, a winning lottery ticket, whatever you feel like, just nothing creepy, nothing edible. I'm probably not going to eat it because I'm going to think you're trying to kill me. Also, Birch Gold is a sponsor this month. If you're bored and you want to just text somebody, and then just text this number, 989-898, and put Alison in the text messages. That's a great way to support the show. You can also get your free info kit on transferring your 401k and IRA into gold if you text that number. But remember, Alison has one L in my name, okay? Hopefully I don't have to tell you guys that anymore. Maybe you were unaware, but for the first time in our history, we are paying budget item except Social Security. And so that means we are spending more on interest than on the national defense budget or even Medicare. So if that concerns you at all, or maybe it doesn't concern you, but you have just been interested in transferring your retirement savings into gold in part or in full, or you just want to learn more about investing in gold, then this is a great way to do it. You can support the work. Alison to 989-898. You'll get a free no obligation info kit on gold, and let me know what you think. Okay.